afternoon from Sydney, Australia. Welcome to episode 3 of Sashi Singh's Talking Point. Today our chief guest is the Honourable Professor Biman Prasad, member of Fiji's current parliament and leader of the National Federation Party. Shortly, we get to meet the man, Biman Prasad, and find out a lot more about him. We'll find out his background and talk about his academic career and why he chose politics over academia, and then focus on what today's interview is really all about, Fiji. Today's Fiji and what Professor Prasad has to say about it. We will also have an insight of what's been happening around Australia with our very own Nikhil Singh. And in the absence of Dennis Rounds, who is probably mid-air en route to the UK as we speak, we will make every effort to bring you some of the latest happenings from Fiji as well. Now it's time to meet our chief guest for today, the Honourable Professor Biman Prasad, who is a Fiji politician. Professor Prasad is a current member of the Parliament in Fiji and is the leader of the National Federation Party. Professor Biman Prasad, welcome to Sashi Singh's Talking Point. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Sashi, and good afternoon and greetings from Fiji to everyone joining us on this program.
Thank you very much for joining Sashi Singh's Talking Point. Let me thank you right at the outset for agreeing to be on this program. Sashi Singh's Talking Point is by no means an established program, but if the last 2 programs are anything to go by, it seems that we are here to stay. Let me tell you, Biman, you have the distinction of being the first politician to be the chief guest in the program. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, as I mentioned in my introduction, ladies and gentlemen, today we will have the opportunity to meet the man first before we start discussing political issues. Now, Biman, where in Fiji do you originally come from? Where were you born?
Shashi, I was born in Draketi in a village called Monindevu, and I went to primary school in Monindevu and then moved on to a junior secondary school, which was Draketi Junior Secondary School. And after finishing Form 4, at that time, most schools were junior secondary schools feeding into only one 5th and 6th form college, which was Lambasa College. So after finishing my junior secondary school, I moved to Lambasa College.
All right. Now, while doing my research, I read in a Fiji Times article from Sunday, the 17th of June 2007, that your parents were rice farmers. What can you tell us about your parents?
Well, that's correct, Sashi. And I grew up in a rice farming community. My father was a rice farmer. We were a very large family. In fact, I come from a family of 7 brothers and 6 sisters. And my parents, although they themselves were not educated in that sense, but they had this very, very good sense of trying to get all the children educated. And the kind of trials and tribulations that we saw growing up in that community, and especially how our parents were able to deal with that particular situation at that time and get the children to go to school. And I remember especially my mother, she used to work for about 16 hours a day, if I can put it that way. And many years after I came to the university, I went back and I was asking my mom, how did she manage that? So they're not only just housewives, they used to work at home, work on the farms, look after the children. And so in many ways, it was a wonderful growing up in a community, not only with my parents, but growing up with the whole village. And so I feel very proud that I come from that rice farming community, and I still very vividly remember, how the whole community was involved in all the, in the raising up of all the children in the village. And so I had the benefit of not just my parents, but my elders in those communities as well.
Very well said, because growing up in a community environment, everyone's an uncle, an auntie, every elder is like a parent figure, and that normally
Exactly.
stands one very well in future life. That's a wonderful grounding to have. So you describe your early childhood as a happy one?
Absolutely, Shashi. As I said, it was a tough environment. There was a lot of struggle, but I remember those days. Everyone in the community, especially the parents, worked very hard, and many of the families that I remember in my village and in my community were large families. For example, my family, we were 13 in the family, and I remember this big separate kitchen that we used to have, and there were 15 people in the kitchen. And I remember my two elder sisters and my mother always used to eat last. And so many years later, I asked them, I said, why did you three always eat last? And my mother and my sisters told me that, oh, they just wanted to make sure that everybody else, has eaten, and if there's any shortage or whatever, then they can always cook. So it was a very emotional, wonderful experience, reflecting or growing up in that community, and today reflecting on some of those experiences. So indeed, we grew up very well, from that point of view.
Now, please tell me, who was your greatest inspiration as you were growing up?
Well, I definitely would like to say it was my mother. In fact, she, as I said, she was not educated at all. She got married very early, and had these 13 children. And the love and kindness and care that she showed to all 13 of them, when I look back today, it's unimaginable, in the current context. And so, right from the early days until I came to the university, she was always an inspiration. And I remember she came to farewell me at the Wangili Airport in Mombasa. When I was taking my first flight to come to the university on a government scholarship, I could see the tears of joy in her eyes, and so she was always a huge inspiration. Apart from my father, who was such a hardworking man, who valued education as well, and was very proud when I came to the university and did a degree from the university.
Now, I believe you had the honor of being the head boy of the Lambasa College, and then you also became the dux of the school. Was becoming the head
Sachi,
boy?
well,
Yeah.
actually, it was not Lambasa College. I was head boy of the Duketi Junior Secondary School, and I was the head boy as well. And Lambasa College always used to receive all the cream from the feeder schools. And so when I
Right.
came to Lambasa College, obviously there are many other students who were smarter than me and did very well. But in my junior secondary school, I was the head boy, and I was also the dux of the school in 1978. So I still cherish those lovely memories, and how the community, even today, some of the elders in the Draketi community, when I go there, and the school keeps inviting me on important occasions. So I have a very good connection with my community in Draketi, and I always cherish that.
Thank you for that correction. My question was going to be, was becoming the head boy the first true responsibility bestowed on yourself?
Well, in fact, if I look at what was happening at that time in the schools, in fact, the schools were very democratic. There was, and I remember in not only in the high school but in the primary school, I was a house leader. You were able to lead your cohort group of students. But when I came to the junior secondary school, we were getting into these little clubs, where we used to have good meetings, write minutes, learn how to chair meetings. And when I became the head of school, and the teachers were so wonderful, when they give you that responsibility, they always supported you. I remember my principal at that time, Balekuta Mateni. He was a great guy, and he used to come, during graduation ceremony. He used to come with his USP graduation gown, and it was such an inspiration that we had somebody like him and all the other teachers at that time. And he used to tell me, how to address people, how to speak, how to write things, how to chair meetings. So in some sense, we were being trained to be leaders, right from the day go. I'm not sure whether we have that kind of democratization or democracy in schools today, given the mess in the education system that we have in this country today.
We'll discuss that in a little while. Now, you then, obviously, as you mentioned, Mum came to the Wangele airport to say goodbye to you as you were about to enter university. You pursued successfully a Bachelor of Arts degree, majoring in mathematics and economics. When did you develop an interest in maths and economics?
Well, I was always, in some sense, very good in mathematics. I had the highest mark, in my Fiji Junior in my own school. And so when I came to Lambasu College, I was still pursuing maths as a very interesting subject and something in which I did very well. And so, that followed through. And when I came to the university, I decided to major, have my degree in mathematics. But economics was a choice in the university. I'd never done economics in high school at that time. The economics as a subject was not very popular in schools. But when I came to the university, and one of my friends, who went to Super Grammar School, they did economics in Super Grammar, and he said, "Well, Biman, why don't you also try economics?" So I ended up in a first lecture for economics, and there was this American professor, and I enjoyed his first lecture. He was so inspirational, and that's how I ended up doing maths and economics, and then pursued my master's and PhD in economics, and became a professor of economics. So it was a very interesting development at the university in terms of me pursuing maths and economics, and indeed economics as a major later on, and completing my master's and PhD.
Yes, indeed. You completed your Masters of Commerce from the University of New South Wales, and then you did a Doctor of Philosophy from the University of Queensland. Now, what was your experience like studying away from Fiji, coming abroad for the purposes of studies, your experience?
Well, I had a wonderful experience in Australia, both in New South Wales and in Brisbane. And I used to spend, Shashi, hours listening to the news, listening to the debates, watching, people like Kerry O'Brien. I remember those days on 7:30 programs. I enjoyed the robustness of the debate, the whole basis of democracy and the media freedom, and the ability of the media to put politicians on the spot, ask, critical questions. And so, it was that part of my study, it was apart from my master's and PhD. All these things was a huge learning environment, and I still cherish those memories of studying in Australia. And I had great professors. I mean, my PhD supervisor, he's over 80 years old now and still writing, and we're still communicating. Professor Clem Tisdale, wonderful man, from Taree in New South Wales. And so the experience I got in Australia studying, was not only just about economics, doing my PhD or my master's, but also learning about democracy, learning about politics. I mean, I was always interested in some kind of politics. I was a student leader in the university, and then I also joined the union movement. When I began my career in the university, I was the president of the staff association, and so interest in politics, as a force for good, was always there, and so that experience in Australia was wonderful.
My research tells me that you met your wife while studying at the University of the South Pacific. You married Rajni Chand in 1986. How would you describe your early married life?
Well, when I came to the university, then I had this word from students, colleagues talking about gold rush, and at that time, everybody was in kind of in a rush to find a partner. And I never actually thought about becoming a lecturer in the university or a professor. I was given a scholarship by the Fiji government at that time. In fact, a lot of the students who came to the university at that time were on a scholarship to do a bachelor's degree in maths and economics, with a graduate certificate in education, which trained me as a secondary school teacher. And so, I was always thinking of, of finding someone, who I was going to marry, and who will be going out there. And I was always thinking about going and teaching in my own community. In fact, I was thinking about going and teaching at the Draketi Junior Secondary School or at Lamasa College. Those were the kind of thinking that I came up with. And so I met this wonderful lady who happened to be from Lambasa. I'd never seen her in Lambasa, but I saw her at the university. And the rest is history, Sashi.
Well, you and Rajni were then blessed with two children, Mayuresh and Namrata. What was parenthood like for both of you?
Well, I mean, in fact, both were born in Australia when I was doing my master's, and it's interesting. The gap between the two is less than a year. My daughter was born just after, 4 days after my son was born in terms of the date of birth. So it was one after the other, so to speak. And we they grew up together. It was such a wonderful experience, seeing them grow. And yeah, we were blessed to have those two with us today.
You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and our chief guest today is the Honourable Professor Biman Prasad, Member of Parliament Fiji and leader of the National Federation Party. Now, Biman, you became a lecturer at the University of the South Pacific in 1986. You were president of the USP Staff Association from 1999 to 2006, head of the School of Economics from 2003 to 2007, and professor of economics and dean of the Faculty of Business and Economics from 2007 to 2011. You were fully engrossed in an academic career. It seems that you had everything that you wanted. But then, in April 2014, you resigned as Professor of Economics from the University of the South Pacific to pursue a political career. Where did this wind of change come from?
That's a very good question, Sashi, and a lot of people have been asking me all along, since I joined politics. In fact, 2014 was not the first time. I actually contested a general election in 99 for the National Federation Party, and Mr. Jairam Reddy, the then leader of the National Federation Party, asked me to contest the election, and obviously we didn't make it. And so we had a good policy at the university, which is still there, that you could take leave and fight an election, and if you lose an election, you come back. And so I came back in 1999, and then decided that politics was not something that I was going to pursue. And that after the promulgation of the 1997 Constitution and the successful election, and restoration of democratic constitution and democracy in the country, I would be better off contributing in the academia, and that's what I did. Until, of course, 2006, when we had another coup, and then we we saw dictatorship until the 2014 election. And I was personally very, very disturbed about what was happening in the country. And I thought, despite the imposition of the 2013 Constitution, I thought the 2014 election will usher in democracy, and that it was a good time to get into politics, because I personally always believed that politics can be a force for good. Sometimes, good politics is not necessarily good policy, and there's always this conflict, there's always this balancing act which goes. But I genuinely believe that I could contribute effectively to progressing and building democracy further, and also helping the country, progress economically, socially, and politically. So I was invited by the party. Many people in the party, stalwarts, seniors in the party, asked me to join and lead the party into 2014 election. And I decided that I'd done quite a bit in academia. I had reached the highest rank of professor, which is the ultimate prize in academia, in my view. And I thought it's time for me to get back and contribute to the community, to the country, and for the greater good. So that was the motivation for me to come back into politics, Shashi.
Great motivation indeed. And as you said, you contested the 2014 elections. And let me just share some figures. In that election, you got 8,097 votes, the fourth highest ranked candidate. Your party, the National Federation Party, received 5.2% of the popular vote and 3 of the 50 parliamentary seats. You were then re-elected in the 2018 elections, winning, and you got a vote margin, you got a vote of 12,137 votes. The 2014 and 2018 elections were fought under the Dihont electoral system. Biman, what are your thoughts on the Dihont system of voting in Fiji right now?
Well, Sashi, it's Dihon system based on proportional representation, and also based on a single national constituency. Shashi, that this constitution, the 2013 constitution, was imposed on the people of Fiji by the military government. And in fact, the Constitution Review Committee that was appointed by the military regime at that time was chaired by the eminent Professor Yash Ghai. And they had come up with a draft constitution, which was later thrown out. Actually, it was banned, and Yash Ghai was basically asked to leave. Now, that draft did not recommend a single national constituency, and it wasn't going to be a Dihon system based on proportional representation. So the system that we have, the proportional representation with a single national constituency, has its own challenges and shortcomings. And in 2014 and 2018 election, parties, which the interim government, which was a military government, became a political party, the Fiji First Party. And the leader who did the coup also became the president of the party and the leader of the party. And obviously, the system was designed in some ways to suit the ruling party or those who were in control of the government in 2013 before the 2014 election. So it is not a system that I would prefer, or a lot of people would prefer in this country. But that's what we have right now.
Biman, now let's look at Parliament in Fiji, or rather the way Parliament functions in Fiji. It has changed so dramatically in the last decade or so. This is now your second term in Parliament. What, in your view, is the most significant change in the way Parliament functions these days, as opposed to years ago when Fiji had a different form of parliamentary system?
Well, first thing, Sashi, is immediately after 2014 election, and from 2015, the ruling party, the Fiji First Party, quickly changed the funding formula for the allocation of funds for parties in Parliament. I mean, you would know the system in Australia and in other, genuine democracies, unlike us, where the opposition party does not have, adequate resources in terms of uh, looking after its work as an opposition party. So, in the previous parliaments, every political party, whether you had one seat or whether you had 3 seats or 4 seats, you had a minimum amount of resources. You had an office, you had a minimum allocation over and above, the based on the number of seats that parties had. That formula was changed. So instead of us getting, 3 or 4 staff, the formula was changed, and the current formula is that every member of parliament is allocated $15,000. It goes to the party, and strictly for parliamentary use. You can't use any of those resources, and so smaller parties like us, our budget was cut from somewhere from 100,000 a year for parliamentary staff and office resources to just 45,000. And so that was the first attempt at restricting the opposition political parties to do their work adequately. The second thing, and in a democracy, Sachi, you and I know this well, and you know this better in Australia. The government, the opposition is as important as the government, and the opposition needs the resources to hold the government to account. The government, the executive arm of the government, or the executive government, is responsible to the parliament. When they come to parliament, they are responsible to the parliament, and the opposition role is to hold the government to account. Unfortunately, in the current climate since 2014, and that is one of the biggest disappointments that I have in the last 7 years being a member of parliament, that the space for opposition parties, in terms of holding the government to account, in terms of accessing information, in terms of getting to the civil servants and government institutions, has been very, very difficult, because the executive government is treating, I said this in Parliament last week on Monday, that the executive government is treating the Parliament as an executive arm of the government. And we believe that the parliamentary secretariat and the parliament process itself is being bullied by this government, and therefore the space for the opposition is very, very tough, in terms of holding the government to account on many things.
What about decorum in Parliament, respect in Parliament for the fellow member of Parliament? In recent times, there have been mention of misogyny in Fiji's Parliament. What about those aspects in terms of the way Parliament functions today?
Well, that's a very good question, Sashi. Just last week, when we started the parliamentary session on the debate on the president's address, the prime minister came out and said, "Oh, we must be ethical. We must not personalize issues." And then on Friday, he went on a vitriolic personal attack on me and many others. And obviously, his own members of parliament, have made misogynistic comments, with respect to members of parliament, women members of parliament in the opposition, talking about their dresses, calling them drama queen, etc., etc. So, this is a government, which talks about ideals, but, doesn't actually practice. So, yes, I mean, and some of the decisions that have been taken by the government, with the sheer numbers in parliament since 2014, is to get rid of members of parliament. I mean, our former president, was suspended from parliament for saying something to another member of parliament on the government side, which they thought was breaching the parliamentary privilege. And so they were held to the parliamentary privilege committee and suspended. So a lot of those things have happened. And it doesn't say much about the way and the decorum and the space and the freedom to say things. I mean, we were hauled into the police station for legitimately criticizing a bill which was presented to Parliament, the bill number 17, famously known, which was in relation to the Native Land Trust Act.
I will
And
come to that. I will stop you there because I want to talk specifically about that further down the track. I'm going to ask you about that
that's
arrest.
fine. That's fine, Sashi. Yeah.
Now, let's move to the D word, democracy. You've mentioned it a few times already. Now, in Parliament, you said a few days ago, you said that any change in government in the next general election will help establish whether democracy truly exists in Fiji. What did you mean by that statement? Or, if I may rephrase my question, what is your take on democracy in Fiji today?
Well, Shashi, the claim by this government that we have genuine democracy is a complete lie. We don't have a genuine democracy in Fiji, and it's not just us in the opposition saying. The international organizations, International IDEA, recently came out with a report that Fiji is a weak democracy, and so in that sense, it is not just us saying that we don't have genuine. In fact, we have is parliamentary dictatorship. We don't have a genuine democracy. But what I said in Parliament is also very important, Sachi, because the government, the president, talked about the test for democracy. The real test for any democracy is when, uh, after the election, when a government in power loses power, what do they do? I mean, we have seen the destruction of democracy in this country after elections. I mean, we had the first test in 1987. The second test was in 1999 when we had the election, and there was an attempted coup which was not successful. I mean, at that time, the commander of the military forces was the current prime minister. And then we had 2006 when the then SDL government won the election. Then we had a coup, again led by the current prime minister. So, what I said in parliament is if in the next election the Fiji First Party loses government, how will they behave? Will they give up power decently? Will they accept defeat? These were questions that I asked because that's the real test of any democracy when governments change through elections. I mean, that's fundamental point. Of course, the prime minister, replied that they will step aside if they lose the election. So yes, I mean that that was his reply.
Well, time will tell once the election results come out, whatever it leads to. Now, still staying on the subject of democracy, do you think there is an element of fear in the country, and because of that element of fear, it does not contribute to free and open discussion, it prohibits criticism, and that perhaps it also prevents growth in the country at so many different levels? Tell me about the element of fear and what you think happens because of that.
Uh, that's a very good question, Sashi. In fact, I have been talking about that since 2014. In fact, if you look at 2014 election and 2018 election, one of the most fundamental things that, or the tricks that this government or the ruling Fiji First Party used was to create fear in the minds of the people, and they are still doing it. Sachi, in the last session of the parliament, one of the ministers, was talking about Rwanda, talking about Solomon Islands, uh, as if if Fiji First or Frank Bainimarama doesn't win the next election, we could have situations like that. He stopped short of saying that, but that's what they were implying. And in the last election campaign, the Fiji First candidates were going around and saying, "Oh, if Biman Prasad comes in, or if Rambuka comes in as the leader of Sudelpa, vote for Biman is vote for Rambuka." And the Attorney General, Mr. Ayaz Sayed Kayum, in one of the campaign meetings, especially among the Indo-Fijians, he said, if you don't vote for Baini Marama, if Baini Marama, if you're not supporting him, then you are putting a dagger on your neck. I mean, those kind of threats were given to one community, and especially the Indo-Fijian community. But as I said to a lot of people who asked me this, and 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 I worried about it, I said, people can be fooled once or twice, but not always. And I think people are much more wiser. They know that this government has lost the plot. The only trick that they might have is the one that they had in the last election, is to go and create fear in the minds of the people. But we know that people are not as gullible as this government or the ruling Fiji First Party would like to think. And we believe that people are fed up with this government, and the time for this government is over.
Now, you mentioned just a while ago about the arrest. You were amongst a group of opposition political leaders who were arrested and taken by the police for questioning. I believe that was because the group was accused of criticizing the current government's move to amend the land legislation. You alluded to that a moment or so ago. How did that impinge on your democratic rights and freedom, first of all? How did it impinge on your democratic rights and freedom? And is it a case that the government in Fiji cannot be criticized, full stop? Two questions there.
It was, Sachi, the answer to the first question. It was a direct assault on not only free speech, not only freedom to criticize government, but direct attack on democracy. I mean, you have a bill in parliament, and you have members of parliament, political party leaders like us. Imagine, you have a bill in the Australian parliament, and a member of the Australian federal parliament goes out and says, on your show, Sasi, that you know this bill is bad, and gets hauled into the police station. uh, that would be a direct assault on democracy, on free speech, and this is exactly what has happened in this country. This is not this what happened to me during that discussion, criticism of the bill. Sachi was not the only time. In 2016, I was arrested with other leaders and locked up in a police cell for, one night, simply because we were pointing out flaws within the 2013 constitution in a panel discussion which was organized by an NGO. So this is not the first time, and as I said, the international community, our development partners, know this and are aware of this, the assault on democracy. So yes, it was a very very clear assault on freedom of speech, democracy, and the right of members of parliament.
You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point. Our chief guest this afternoon is the Honourable Biman Prasad, the Fiji Member of Parliament in opposition and the leader of the National Federation Party. And if I may just request those viewers who are watching, if you would like to share this feed amongst your family and friends, we would appreciate that as well. Let me now, Biman, move towards the health sector. Let me say that a country's success and integrity should be and often is measured by the mouths fed, homeless families sheltered, jobs provided for the jobless, the affordable and available health care for all. This is how we share humanity with the middle class and the poor. This is how the moral fabric of a society is determined. In a statement attributed to you as the leader of the National Federation Party, you said last month, and I quote, "The state of decay of the public hospitals and health facilities, as well as its inability to provide decent medical care to the people, is a scourge on the nation." A scourge on the nation. What did you mean by this statement?
Shashi, exactly what you read. The decay in the health system is a real scourge on the nation. The condition of our health system. I have followed government policies, health facilities, social policies, economic policies for more than 30 years in this country, and the state of our health services is the worst ever in the history of this country. And we have on many occasions, talked about this in Parliament, moved motions in Parliament to at least have an inquiry into the reasons why the health system has decayed so much. I mean, on a daily basis, I said this in Parliament. It doesn't give me any pleasure to go into Parliament and talk about the health system, but we get calls, 24 hours from people. I gave an example of this lady from Nandi, whose husband is having serious heart problems, and the doctors have advised that he needs an angiogram, to see what can be done to help him. And the angiogram at the CWM hospital has not been working for more than 2 years. So after our statement that you read, the Ministry of Health came out and said, "Oh, the angiogram machines have been fixed." But then, a week later, she was still told that the machine is not working. And so we can't even get the truth out of the Ministry of Health and the Minister of Health to say what is working and what is not working. So, and then there are a lot of other issues, we've talked about in the past. I've raised issues with respect to shortage of basic medicine in the hospitals and health centers. And so this is a government, which has completely neglected the concerns of the citizens of this country about the health system. They in 2018, they talked about having public-private partnership. We have a Bar Hospital, which was built, a new Bar Hospital, is sitting idle there, and the condition of the Bar Mission Hospital, is terrible. 3 years now, we haven't had any progress with respect to the operation of Ba and Lotoka Hospital in terms of the public-private partnership with Aspen Australia, which is a health company, Australian health company. And so recently, I talked about that as well. And it's a very, very unhealthy situation, with respect to our health services in this country.
Unhealthy situation because of the health of the people. If that's not okay, then the health of the nation suffers as well. Now, still sticking to health, Biman, let us address the COVID-19 situation in Fiji. As of 3rd December 2021, Fiji had recorded 697 deaths, and as at the same date, there were 122 active cases. As at the same date, 3rd December 2021, our state, New South Wales state, recorded 629 deaths. Fiji had 69 more deaths than New South Wales. What do you attribute Fiji's high death rate to with regards to COVID-19?
Well, Sashi, first of all, I want to say, of course, the government brags about, how they have, but their management of the COVID-19 pandemic in Fiji was a complete disaster. In fact, Sashi, the total number of deaths, I would put it to 1,300, because the 697 was directly attributed to COVID, but then you had others dying of existing diseases, but they had also caught COVID. In fact, what we are saying, that many would have still lived if they didn't catch COVID-19 virus. So what we were saying to the government, of course, the government refused to listen, because they, in fact, the leaders at that time were missing. They left it to the doctors to actually come out and tell the people, what needs to be done, and what and how we should, navigate through the crisis. But if the government had taken decisive action, if they had shown leadership, and locked down and got the country prepared for the vaccination program, we would have avoided those deaths. So you are absolutely right in comparing the low number of deaths in New South Wales as compared to Fiji. And I must say, Sashi, that if it was not for the help that we got from Australia and New Zealand, in fact, and countries like India and the US and other development partners, all our vaccines have come from the donors. Apart from that, our donors, particularly Australia and New Zealand, have provided budget support to look after, thousands and thousands of families, who are struggling to make ends meet. So, what is the leadership of this government? A total failure, a total disaster. So, they cannot claim for 1 second that somehow they have shown leadership to actually address the issues of COVID-19 pandemic. All they did during that time is to continue with the heavy-handed approach in dealing with the people and getting the people on board to adhere to COVID protocols that were put out by the Ministry of Health.
You've just mentioned something that I've been suspecting all along. I mentioned to you the figure of 697 deaths. You've come and said the death figures are around about 1,300 odd figures. Now, I've had a death in the family as well. The family member had COVID, had coronavirus, and some 3 months after that suddenly passed away. And they put down the symptom as a mild heart attack. You know, and I know, people don't die from a mild heart attack. What has been the reason for the correct numbers not being stated by the powers that be? The fatality
Well,
numbers.
I don't know the scientific basis, but what they said, Sachi, was that they divided the deaths into two categories. One where they said that this is directly related to the COVID virus, and those who had existing conditions but got the virus and died, they are saying that they died because of existing conditions. So those deaths were not included as directly related to COVID. So what we are saying is those that were directly attributed to COVID 19 and those indirectly, even if you take that as indirectly, the total number of deaths is 1,300. And they are not talking about that. In fact, they don't even mention that, in their contributions in Parliament, and haven't shown the kind of empathy that they should be showing as a government to the families and those who have lost loved ones, over that period.
Now, what do you think should happen to get rid of the state of decay in the health system in Fiji so one could get rid of the scourge that you talk about? What should happen?
Well, Sashi, first of all, I think, as I said, we moved a motion in Parliament, and we said we should have an immediate, independent inquiry into the delivery of health services, the availability of facilities in our hospitals and health centers, because in the last 7 years, I have personally, taken health as an agenda in Parliament, and we have asked many questions and moved motions, and we have seen in front of our eyes the conditions of the hospitals, the delivery of the services deteriorate because we talk to the people on a daily basis. I'm sure they are getting the same kind of complaints from the people. And we can't understand why they can't appoint any. I mean, if you had the situation in Australia, any sensible government, would have appointed an independent group of experts to look at where is the bottleneck, where are the constraints, why the system is not working. For example, the shortage of medicine. There was a research done in 2016, and the article was published in 2017, which said that the four main reasons for the shortage of medicine was bureaucratic bungling. Second was lack of funding. Third was lack of logistics, and the fourth one was patient issues. So all those four reasons were provided. Now research is there. This government has not bothered, to appoint an independent committee or a group of experts to look at how we can do. So what they need to do, and when we come into government, Sachi, this is the first thing we will do. We will appoint an independent committee to look at immediately what's going on in the health and how come up with recommendations how those systems can be improved, those bottlenecks can be removed, appropriate funding can be allocated so that the delivery of health services and the availability of health facilities to the people is provided. I mean, I worry about the poor. I mean, we have a poverty rate which is almost close to 50%. I mean, you have 30% living below the poverty line before the COVID-19 pandemic, and another 20% are always on the margins of poverty, as you know. And after COVID-19, that 20% would have fallen also below poverty line. Uh, People, those middle class, upper middle class, rich, who have insurance, we have private hospitals, can get the medicine, can get the treatment. But those people who don't have insurance rely on the public health system. And if our public health system is falling apart, then you can imagine, what those people, families and loved ones are going through if they can't get that kind of treatment, especially tertiary care, heart conditions, the diabetes rate, we are known in the world as the number one, diabetes country. I mean, the number of amputations that we seeing in this country is unbelievable. I mean, so all the indicators are there, and this government seems to be carrying on with business as usual.
Let us now shift our attention to the opening of international borders, especially Fiji's. Fiji's borders opened to international travelers this week. At the same time, there's a growing concern worldwide all of a sudden about the new Omicron variant of COVID-19. Australia, for instance, has announced a delay in opening its borders. We're playing a sort of wait-and-see approach. Given that Fiji is now open for travel, give us your thoughts on how prepared Fiji is in terms of dealing with any health issues that might arise due to this Omicron variant.
Well, Shashi, that's a very good question, and I think there is still a lot of uncertainty with respect to the Omicron variant, and how contagious and what could be the immediate health impact of that variant. Put those uncertainties aside. But I think if you look at what governments around the world are trying to do, is to take a very, very precautionary approach. And we have opened our borders. We all want tourists to come back. We all want our economy to pick up. But we also need to understand that we need to make sure that all our precautionary measures are put in place in a very, very strict way. I'm not sure whether that is the case at the moment, and we are getting very sketchy, public presentations from the Ministry of Health and the government leaders themselves, in terms of how they're going to deal with a breakout of a new variant in Fiji if that happens in the future. So there are a lot of questions, and we will keep asking those questions. We will keep the government on toes, and we will demand answers from them to tell the people of this country as to what their plans are, and how they're going to deal with that eventuality in case we have the Omicron variant in Fiji, depending on how we deal with it. So yes, I think it's a very, very important question that you've asked.
Let's keep our fingers crossed that things are contained. Now, education. Teachers have been in the news as of late. As of late, they've become the attention in Fiji. There has been an attack on the so-called unqualified teachers and calls for their replacement. What are your views on this issue?
Well, Sashi, that's again a very good question. But let me just give you a broader perspective on what has happened to the education system in this country before I come back on that very specific question. The last time we had an education commission was almost 22 years ago. That was in 1999. And so since the 2006 coup, there's been a lot of haphazard reforms, by the interim government, the military government. Then this government, in fact, we've been calling for an education commission since 2014. And this government has gone on a rampage. They are talking about reforms, but all those reforms have been haphazard. And now we have a system, education system, which has completely lost track. The quality of education that we need to be worried about all the time is uncertain, unless you have a Education Commission and independent, experts looking at how these reforms over the last so many years have been undertaken and what are the successes and failures. Somebody has to evaluate all that and come up with a recommendation to say, okay, this has not worked, this has not worked, this has worked. How do we deal with it? Instead, what this government has done has destroyed the partnership that always existed in this country for many years, such the partnership between parents, teachers, and government and unions. 99% of the schools in this country were built by our forefathers, our parents, our communities, our religious organizations, and they are still run by them. This is a government which has destroyed that partnership and has in a very, very dictatorial way forced those reforms. Now they're coming out and saying, oh, teachers are not qualified. What were you doing in the last 15 years? And the moment, Sashi, you put a teacher in the classroom, you never call that teacher unqualified, because what is the message you are sending to the parents and the students? What they should be saying, I think both the minister for education and the permanent secretary, completely went berserk, when they in their rush to say something important about education, said, oh, we have so many unqualified teachers. That was not what they should have said. So after insulting the teachers, after saying that, and after we had a go at them and said, look, don't insult our teachers in this country. People with certificates and diplomas, teaching in the schools are qualified teachers in their own right. If you want them to upgrade their qualifications, if you want them to go for in-service, I mean, this is what we had in this country always. By all means, do that, but don't call them unqualified. And so now the minister came out in Parliament last week and said, "Oh yeah, no, we're not saying that teachers with certificates and diplomas are qualified, but you've done the damage. You can control the damage a little bit now, but the overall picture within the education system, teachers are living in fear, and I talked to many of them. They have not listened to the unions, which are major stakeholders within the education system. And so when we come into government, Sashi, the first thing we will do is to appoint an independent education commission, a commission that will have a terms of reference that will go and look at all the reforms in the last 15 years or 20 years, what has worked, what has not worked, and what is the state of the quality of education in the country. Are we producing quality students from primary school to go to secondary school, and then from secondary school to the university? These are important measures, and every country which has a fine education system periodically undertake these kinds of reviews, and these are done by experts, not politicians, not ministers and permanent secretaries who have a political agenda in this country right now. We don't have a civil servant, Sashi, in this country anymore, which as you probably would remember in your time, were very, very independent. And that is another reason why we have a very, very weak democracy. We have a very dictatorial government, because even the civil service, which is supposed to be an independent arm of the government, in the sense that the civil service hold the ministers and politicians to account as well, in terms of making sure that things are done properly according to process and procedures. Right now, under this constitution, ministers, permanent secretaries, hire, fire, determine, they have the powers with the agreement of the minister, is actually provided for in this constitution, that the permanent secretaries have absolute power to hire, to fire, to determine the remuneration, to discipline, with the agreement of the minister. So if I am the permanent secretary, for instance, and you are a civil servant, and I I want to fire you, or I want to increase your salary, or I want to reduce your salary, or I want to demote you, then I can do that as long as the minister agrees. I mean, we never had that, system. We have this system under this constitution today. And so the civil service is totally compromised. People within the civil service are fearful. There is a lot of uncertainty about decision making. And that's why a lot of things don't get done in government in terms of delivery of services, because the civil servants don't have the independence and the power to do so.
Well said, indeed. You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and my chief guest this afternoon is the Honourable Professor Biman Prasad, Member of Parliament in Fiji and leader of the National Federation Party. At this juncture, let me say that this week I phoned the office of the Minister, and I also sent an invitation to the Minister for Economy, Mr. Ayaz Sayed Qayyum, to come on this program so we can discuss a number of things in relation to the Fiji First government. I advise that I'm awaiting a response from the Honourable Minister's office. Mr. Minister, let me please extend an open invitation to you to participate in Sashi Singh's Talking Point, so you also have an opportunity to put your government's views live to our viewers. Now, Biman, let's turn to the economy. How do you see the current state of Fiji's economy?
Shashi, let me make the first point. The state of our economy was already downhill. In fact, we had negative growth in 2019. So essentially, what I'm saying is that before the COVID pandemic hit us, we were actually on the slide. We experienced a negative growth in 2019. And when you have negative growth in an economy, it's a very, very important, signal, and it indicates a legacy of what happened in the past. So since 2006 coup, and in particular since 2014, this government, went on a rampage, to spend money that they didn't have. So essentially, when you don't have the money, you borrow. And since 2014, the government kept on borrowing, kept on spending, and they justified that by saying, "Oh, we are building infrastructure. We're doing this. We're doing that." Yes, borrowing can be useful. Borrowing is not necessarily bad, but that borrowing ought to be used properly, efficiently, effectively, so that you can get the value for the dollar that you spend. What I said in Parliament actually last week, and this is my estimate from the budgets from 2015 right up to 2020. I have said that on average, we have wasted $500 million a year between 2015 and 2020 through wastage, pilferage, mismanagement, and may I say corruption. So if you add that together, you were talking about $3 billion in 6 years. And imagine, what we could have done with that money, if we had been careful, if we are using that money. And government is saying, where is the evidence? I said the evidence is sitting in government. If you want to look at that, look at that. And so, what was happening over the last 7 years, or before the COVID pandemic hit us, was a government which was focused on spending, looking good, preparing for elections, and before 2018 election. Of course, we had cyclones in 2016. It affected the GDP. We understand all that. But what we are saying is that the government's economic management has been extremely poor. And they, even knowing that it was poor, they talked about some kind of boom, and they gave the name Bainimarama boom. But the figures don't show a boom. I mean, 2019 we had negative growth. Additionally, Shashi, the last household income expenditure survey, which was done before the COVID pandemic hit us, and that showed that we had almost 30% of people living below the poverty line, actually higher than what the last household income expenditure survey. So if we are doing so well, if we had unprecedented growth, if we had a boom, why are so many people still living in poverty? So we were in a bad shape, before the pandemic. But when the pandemic hit, it gutted us. And basically, what this government had done was put all its egg in one basket. And if we have time, I'll be talking about the sugar industry and
I'm
other
I'm coming to
areas,
that right away.
yeah.
I'm coming to the
But
sugar industry right away
yeah,
because
but what?
yep,
Sure,
go ahead.
sure. All I'm saying is that we were in a bad shape before the COVID-19 pandemic. After COVID-19 pandemic, our tourism industry was totally decimated, and 40% of GDP was based on tourism, and so we are in a bad shape. We are borrowing more. We are getting budget support from Australia and New Zealand, and that too, is very important, is very significant. That the government brags about, oh, Australia and New Zealand have confidence in us. Of course, they don't have confidence in your economic management. What Australia and New Zealand is doing is because they realize that the people in this country are suffering. I mean, we need money for social welfare. We need people to be looked after, and so they are providing budget, and we thank them. The other important point, Sashi, that this government has not talked about at all. And I want to use this opportunity, your show, to actually thank all our people, living in Australia, New Zealand, America, Canada, who've been sending remittances to this country. Last year alone, Sachi, we got $652 million in personal remittances coming to Fiji. Imagine if we didn't have that money coming from people like yourselves, and on all others. So I want to say, thank you very much to all our people, who've been supporting their families and friends. And this year, I'm told that by October, it is almost hitting, more than 700 million. And imagine if we didn't have that kind of money coming, the economic situation would be even worse. So by sending the remittances, you are helping creating demand. Government also collects taxes and the rest of it. So I want to take this opportunity to thank all our people and to tell them this is a government which mismanaged the economy before COVID and has no clue what it wants to do in the future. And so, thank you for helping people.
Now, viewers, I have a number of other subjects to discuss with the good professor. However, if you'd like to send some questions along, and with due respect to Professor Biman Prasad, hopefully he has a little bit more time towards the end of the program to answer some questions. Biman, can we welcome some questions?
Happy to stay on. Happy to stay on, Sashi.
Thank you very much. Now, you touched on the sugar industry. That's where I'd like to go now. There was a time in Fiji when the sugar industry was the backbone of the country. There was so much being said about the sugar industry. There is rather so much being said about the sugar industry these days, including the viability of the Fiji Sugar Corporation, its sale of prime properties, and the recent outcry from cane farmers about being shortchanged in cane payments. Just what is the state of Fiji's sugar industry these days?
Well, basically, under this government, under Frank Bainimarama and the Fiji First government, we now have a pocket-size industry from a industry which was producing more than 3 million tons of sugarcane in 2006, now down to 1.3, 1.4 range of between 1.2 to 1.5, 1.6. Now, if we had a sugar industry today, which was producing about 3 million tons of cane, such is the economic impact that we are seeing now as a result of the pandemic, because we put all our eggs in one basket. We completely neglected the sugar industry, the agricultural sector, the dairy industry, and so today we have nothing to fall back. And under this government, the sugar industry has completely, is on the verge of collapse. FSC is insolvent. As you said quite rightly, you observed quite rightly that this is a government which is struggling to sell FSC properties now. And I don't know what is the agenda. I mean, they keep talking about the fact that, oh, we have reformed the sugar industry. All they did, when they came into government, was to destroy the Sugarcane Growers Council. So Sugarcane Growers Council is now a toothless tiger, acting like a arm of the government instead of representing the sugarcane farmers. And more than 200,000 people directly or indirectly depend on the sugar industry, even today. And imagine, the industry is shrinking from 3.2 million tons down to 1.2, 1.3, or range of between 1.2 to 1.6 million tons. It is no wonder that the poverty rate has not declined, and in fact, it has increased, because a lot of the economy in the West, right from Reki Reki to Singatoka, and economy in Banwa Lebu and Senganga, were dependent on the sugar industry. Sugar industry has a huge multiplier effect. Every dollar that comes through export of sugar has a much larger impact on the economy than the same dollar that comes from tourism, because, as you know, a good percentage of the dollar from tourism actually leaks out of the country. So, Sashi, the sugar industry is on life support, and this government has not got any idea how to fix it. In the last 7 years, Sashi, I have moved so many motions. I have called on, I have pleaded with the Prime Minister and the Fiji Press government to have a joint parliamentary committee. We always had a joint parliamentary committee, from Ratumara days to all the prime ministers, where the opposition and the government would come together and work with the stakeholders and incentivize and get the farmers to produce cane and resolve issues within the industry. But this government, and we all know this is a dictatorial government, and I've said this, we now have a two-man government who are not prepared to listen to any ideas or any suggestion from the opposition to work together.
A very sad and sorry state of affairs in terms of the sugar industry. Obviously, someone has to realize sooner rather than later that Band-Aid solutions just do not work. Now, fuel prices. On the 1st of December, the Fiji government announced the latest fuel price hikes. In a country where the average wage, and correct me if I'm wrong, the average wage is, I think, $2.68 per hour. The price of motor spirit is now $2.75 per litre. Kerosene, which thousands of people rely on for their daily cooking needs, kerosene increased by 25 cents per litre and now costs $1.82 a litre, and a litre of diesel will now cost $2.31 a litre, premix $2.35. Just this week, you asked the government to show compassion and fulfill its social obligations, its social obligatory responsibility. What did you mean by this statement, and do you think anyone in government really listens or really cares?
Well, very good question, Sashi. The After the pandemic, as you know, the global fuel price went down. And when this government brought the budget in 2020, they put a 20 cents per liter tax. And the justification that the Minister for Economy put forward was that, the global prices have gone very low. And so even with 20 cents tax, the consumers would still pay less. Now that situation has changed, and we've had 3 or 4 rounds of price increases. And what we are saying is, you said, when you did the budget, when you put the tax, that because the global prices have gone down, even with 20% tax, the prices will still be lower. Now that situation has changed. Why are you still keeping the 20 cents tax? And the minister's response, he says, "Oh, it's stupid because we're going to lose $56 million in tax revenue." Now, he unsurprisingly revealed the true intention. So it was not to help people, it was to collect revenue. But he doesn't seem to understand simple economics, Sashi. You know, it's better to put that $56 million into the pockets of the people, because if you put that money into the pockets of the people where they are already struggling to spend, that money will go back to the economy. The government will actually get back taxes, but you are also helping the people. It's all right for him and the government to say, "Oh, we can't give up that revenue." It's all right for them to drive in big tinted Prados, and for their rich, business friends to pass on any increase in. People have to understand that the fuel price, fuel is like, it, in terms of globally, we call it, in economics, we call it fuel inflation or oil inflation. Because
Mm-hmm.
when the price of oil goes up, every other cost goes up. The businessmen, carting goods to a supermarket, from the ports to, uh, their own supermarkets, they don't pay for that increase in fuel price. They pass it on to the consumers. So when the consumers go into the supermarket and pick up a packet of milk, they are the ones who are paying that tax. And so, the minister should go and tell the ordinary people who are struggling to put food on the table that it is stupid to remove the 20 cents tax on fuel. It's a terrible, terrible decision. And he was saying, "Oh, it's part of the appropriation bill." Of course, it was part of the appropriation bill, and that can be changed, through a bill in Parliament. So the reasons he gave originally, and the reasons he's giving now, shows the true intention of this government, that the only focus is to make sure how they look, whether they have enough revenue, but they don't seem to understand basic economics of how these things work. And I would still say to him, remove the 20 cents, or unless he's waiting for that to happen closer to the election so that they can go and tell the people, "Oh, we're doing all the things right now, we should be voted back." This is what they probably plan to do anyway.
As a sweetener. Now, given that somewhere as close to, correct me if I'm wrong, um, somewhere as close to 50% of the population in Fiji are living in poverty or on the margins of the poverty line, one simple question. I mean, I live here in Sydney. Most of our viewers are from around the world. Simple question: how will the people in Fiji manage, given the steep rise in fuel prices, as well as their ability to afford basic groceries for their families, with the wages being around $2.68 at an average per hour?
Uh, Very, very good question. As I said to you earlier, Sashi, that the poverty rate, the household income expenditure survey, showed that this is before the COVID-19 pandemic hit us, that our poverty rate was hovering around 30%. And as I also said to you earlier, in Fiji, almost 20 to 25% of the people are always on the margins of the poverty. So, for example, if they lose jobs and if the income is affected, they quickly fall below the poverty line. And my estimate is that right now you're absolutely right, that more than 50% of the people would have fallen below the poverty line and are struggling to make ends meet. And it makes good economic sense for any government to ensure that you don't put extra burden on those kinds of families who are in that situation right now. And so the example you gave about the fuel tax, with this 20 cents tax on a liter, fuel prices keep going up. It's not the rich and the business who are going to pay the cost of that rise in fuel price. They simply pass it on to the consumers. So it is absolutely ridiculous, and it shows that this government actually lacks compassion by putting out those kind of that kind of tax, and letting people suffer more. It makes good economic sense, and I talked about this. For example, they provided this 360. Again, you divide $360 for 3 months. You divide that by three. It comes to about $30 a week. Again, Sachi, it's a small amount, but people still appreciate that, and the government should not just brag about that. All they said in Parliament, "Oh, we're providing this," but that's not enough. And so we need to look at other ways to cushion the drastic and negative impact on the ability of the families to make ends meet. The final thing I want to say is that I want to repeat what I said earlier, and I want to again thank all our people, because the remittances are feeding a lot of families in this country. 652 million alone in 2020. This year in 2021, it could reach more than 700 million. And that is not only good for those struggling families, but it is also good for the economy. So, you guys out there, you are, by sitting there in Sydney and Melbourne and Auckland and US and Canada, you are not only helping our families, but you are also contributing hugely to our economy, and keeping the economy going. At least for the time being, until we are able to see a recovery of the tourism industry and other sectors of the economy.
Now, Biman, earlier in the week, you accused the Fiji Revenue and Customs Service, the FRCS, of colluding with the Ministry of Employment. You said that the FRCS used the COVID-19 pandemic and defined it as an act of God to significantly reduce their workforce. You said both the government and the FRCS were not truthful about the real reason for the loss of over 200 jobs, in addition to the frontline workers on the borders, primarily customs officers, who were laid off last year. What is the truth in this situation?
The important question that we asked, Sashi, is why did it took FRCS this long to understand? They've been talking about. They gave three reasons. They talked about the fact that it's because of digitization, that they have a new system, and that suddenly they could have the end-to-end process done digitally, so they don't need the people. The second thing they said was it's because of the economic conditions, which means they don't have the kind of revenue or the budget to support all their staff. And the second, of course, is they're talking about restructuring. Now, why would you want to restructure and make people redundant, lose jobs in an environment where people are already struggling, where people, I mean, it's a government agency, it's a government statutory. It is the responsibility of the government not to, let people go off the jobs and lose all their livelihood without giving us the true picture of what's happening. If if they mismanaged it, if they bungled it, if they continued to hire people and have a system which was unsustainable, then they should admit that. They should admit that it was what they did in the past that has led to what they are doing now. Because now you have a crisis, and suddenly you don't have the funds. You don't have the ability to retain these people. But it has to be done in a humane way, not suddenly putting out people with all these uncertainties and saying to people, okay, you could go tomorrow, you could go next week. People who came and shared the information with us was quite devastated. It was quite a sorry state of affairs, to learn the way in which people are being handled, and the way in which the reforms, the so-called reforms, the so-called restructuring, and the so-called reasons given by the government or the FRCS board makes no sense to us. And what we are saying is, talk to the unions, talk to the stakeholders, talk to the employees, and find ways to let them stay on until we see some improvement in the economic conditions in the country. And they're
Let's,
using that,
yeah.
as I said, they're also using the law, because there is a law which says, if an employer feels that as a result of an act of God, because the COVID-19 pandemic, according to the law, is an act of God, and therefore, if an employer says, I don't want you anymore, the employer really has no obligation to provide the appropriate compensation or follow the industrial relations laws and requirements. They can just let people go. And this is what FRCS board is trying to do.
All right, let's look ahead to the year 2022 when Fiji is supposed to go to the next elections. Firstly, are you, Biman Prasad, confident that the elections will be held as scheduled?
Shashi, the election, as per the constitution, this constitution stipulates the time frame for an elected government. And so, according to this constitution, the election can be held anytime. Parliament can be dissolved anytime after 3 years, 6 months, and 3 years, 6 months will finish in May. And so, if you go by the date, the earliest the election could be held, according to the elections office, is 9th July, or the latest would be January 2023. So, between July and January 2023, the elections can be held anytime.
Now,
And the
opposition, sorry.
constitution provides no reason why the election will have to be delayed for any reason.
So that window of opportunity is between July and January 2023.
Correct. Correct.
All right. Now, opposition parties have pointed to what they see as shortcomings in the electoral process in Fiji. What are some of these shortcomings in your view?
Well, the electoral law in Fiji. First of all, Sachi, we have to work within what the law is. That's the first point I want to make. But having said that, I can say to you that we are very unhappy about the electoral laws and the amendments to the electoral laws that have been made recently. For example, one key one, apart from the many other flaws and difficulties, it'll take another probably an hour to talk about the flaws in the Political Parties Act and the Electoral Act and the whole election laws. But
That's a
one
subject for another
recent
day.
amendment,
That is a
yeah,
subject
that
for
that
another
could be a
day.
subject for another day, Sachi. Thank you. But one important one that I want to point out that the government recently brought, and that amendment was in relation to the Financial Management Act, but within that they brought the Electoral Act as well, which says that opposition parties, have to provide costing of every policy. Now, in a normal democracy in Australia and New Zealand, if the Labour Party, comes out of the policies, there might be people who would be analysing the Liberal National Party might say, oh, you're promising too much, your costing is not. But that's a debate between political parties, and the decision as to whether a particular policy is feasible or is not feasible is eventually decided by the voters of the country. Now, what this government has done, they brought a law to say, if we say we're going to guarantee such and such price for sugar after we come into government, then we have to provide a written explanation. And right now, we don't know who we are going to provide the written explanation to in government. In fact, we suspect that there might be another law or another amendment to certain laws that might come, which will stipulate then where we need to go. So at the end of the day, this is a government which wants us to tell them how we're going to fund our policies, and it's for them to accept whether that's right or wrong. And they are in government. They will have the whole civil service bureaucracy, the machinery. They have access to all the figures and the budgets and the plans, and they can say, okay, so all they can do is, so basically they are stopping the opposition from effectively going out and campaigning with and making promises. Because, as I said, in a democracy, it's the people. They can criticize our policies. They can say, oh, this is not feasible. You're going to create so much debt. That's fine with us. We can say the same about them, but it is for the people to then judge whether what Biman Prasad and the National Federation Party are promising makes sense or not. It's not for the government and a party which is in government, which has direct interest, to tell the opposition, no, this is, you can't promise this, because you can't tell us in their view this is how you can fund it. It's ridiculous. We know in a democracy, Sashi, the political parties sometimes offer the moon, but that's the nature of the democracy. It's for the people to judge, not another competing political party which has an interest to win the election to determine what other political parties offer to the people. That's my interpretation of the recent amendment. And so, of course, there are other laws. Sashi, one of the things that I should point out to you is, in an election, the role of the media is very, very important. In fact, we talk more directly to media outside. I mean, you've had criticisms of probably the two most independent media organizations in the country, the Fiji Times and the Fiji Village and FM 96.
Communications Fiji
We know,
Limited.
yeah, Communications Fiji Limited. The two government mouthpiece, basically, funded by government, put out government propaganda in a way that the opposition party doesn't get. And the media decree is a very, very draconian decree, which is still in place. And so that also affects the way in which the opposition parties are able to articulate their views through the media.
Now, as you know, political participation is the basis of democracy and a vital part of the enjoyment of all human rights. You mentioned people. The right of all people to vote in elections without any discrimination is one of the most fundamental of all human rights and civil liberties, of course. I take privilege in voting in the Fiji elections. However, in recent times, I've had to stop and think about the fairness of the elections. Here's a $1 million question for you. Do you think the elections will be fair? Will opposition parties compete on an equal footing?
Very good question, Sashi. The environment, we've said this before. We've said this to the international or multinational observer groups in the last two elections, that the environment is not free and fair because of the draconian pieces of law, particularly the media law, the electoral law, the political parties law, the way in which political parties can raise funds, the restrictions, the bureaucratic, nightmare that political parties have to go through for compliance. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have compliance laws, by all means, but these laws, as you said quite rightly, Sashi, the laws must facilitate the participation of the people. If the people do not participate in political parties, in fundraising, in making their policies, in coming out openly and publicly, that's not democracy. And the laws that are there ought to facilitate that participation. Unfortunately, the laws that we have in Fiji right now, whether it's directly political parties law or electoral law or other laws such as media laws, none of them are conducive to creating a free and fair environment in which the people can participate fully, as ought to happen in a democracy.
And
So, that puts us into a very, very difficult situation as well.
so, what is the mood within the electorate at this stage of proceedings?
Well, as I said before, Sashi, I mean, uh, people are, people can be gullible. People can vote on the basis of what the government in power, the party in power offers to them. But people are not stupid as well. People can see what what this government has done, their modus operandi, the way in which they have ridden roughshod over people's rights. So people are, I believe that people in Fiji are Democrats. They like democracy, they like freedom, and they have reached a stage where they now know that this government has actually been taking them for a ride. And as I said in Parliament, uh, this government's time is up, and people will, in my view, vote them out in the next election.
So, we talk about people. U.S. President Abraham Lincoln at the Gettysburg Address on November 19th, 1863, in one of the best known speeches spoken of all times, of course, said, "Government of the people, by the people, for the people." You said during your reply to the President's address to Parliament this week that the current government of Fiji behaves as if though it owns Fiji. It believes that people are here to serve them, and it does not serve the people of Fiji. What did you mean by that statement?
Shashi, I wish that wisdom that you just quoted from the former U.S. president, resided in some of our leaders who are running the country today. Unfortunately, that wisdom is not there. And one of my deepest, disappointments since 2014 is the lack of that wisdom and decency within the leaders of the Fiji First Party and with this government in promoting democracy as a genuine form of government. All they've done is talked about it, and unfortunately, the our international partners, our democratic partners, in some sense, have wished, and they probably are still wishing that someday we will have genuine democracy, and in some sense they have engaged with this government. They have tried to provide the support through UNDP for the parliament and for the government and for the people of this country, so that we can move towards genuine democracy. But unfortunately, I think that was wishful thinking. That has been my big disappointment. And I don't think that this government, they've gotten used to dictatorship, because the foundation of this government is out of dictatorship. I mean, some of the people who are there, who are leading it now, and are the most vocal critics of the opposition, have had their entry into politics, into government, through dictatorship. So when they talk about genuine democracy, when they talk about stability and all that, they forget that their own history is steeped into dictatorship, and we need to move away from that. And as I said, the biggest test for these people, biggest test for any democracy, is a change of government. And that is why I am saying that the people expect a change of government, people are ready for a change of government, and people will vote for a change of government in the next election. Uh, it's only and that means that for this government, that is a very, very clear signal, and we believe that that is going to happen in 2022.
All right, a series of quick questions and hopefully with some quick answers so we can go to some viewer questions as well.
Sure.
Now, there are thousands of Fiji voters who live overseas. I am one of them. While there's a re-registration process happening in Fiji, is there any discussion of re-registering overseas voters, those people of Fiji origin who are entitled to vote?
Again, Shashi, the whole process of re-registration and this whole change in the law, which resulted from the removal of Niko Nawaikula as a member of parliament, and subsequently, he winning the case, and then government not happy with it comes up and brings a change in law. And now thousands of people, especially women, have to go and change the birth certificate and re-register. In our view, it was a terrible, it's a terrible and unnecessary thing for government to do, to put so many people at such inconvenience. Having said that, that's the law now. What we're doing is encouraging. I went and got my new card as well. We are encouraging all our people to please, if you want to get this government out in the next election, register and please go and vote. And I'm also hoping that the elections office will. I haven't heard any specific. I haven't seen that, but maybe it's already there. Maybe the elections office already has a plan, Sachi. But I'll find that out to see how the voters like yourselves can re-register. If you are required to re-register.
Thank you very much for that. And by all means, if you share that information with me, I'll share that with our viewers. Now,
Thank
you've realized so far, and I've asked you to be brief on the next series of questions. This one, please be brief. I know we could speak for hours on this next question.
Yeah.
You would have realized by now, I have not uttered a word on the recent COP26. In your view, what did Fiji achieve with its 36 or 37 member delegation to Glasgow? And most importantly, what tangible differences will be realized for a better Fiji?
Well, Shashi, very brief. I called it a junket. We still believe that whatever Fiji's presence could have been with a much smaller contingent, and this excuse or this defense by the government, these that junket was funded by the taxpayers, not by the taxpayers of this country, but by the donors. But fundamentally, Sashi, if you're a Australian citizen, if you're a donor, Australian government or New Zealand government or any donor gives money, they don't give money to somebody in government. It's not personal. They give the money to the country. They give the money to the taxpayers of this country. So whether it was funded by the donors or the taxpayers of this country is a moot point. The point is, why did the government have to go with such a large delegation? And what is the tangible outcome? It remains to be seen. We we will wait for that, for some of those outcomes. But we believe that that junket could have been avoided.
Well, just on that very quickly, even if it is funded by donors, donor funding also needs to have transparency and accountability for sure.
Exactly, and we hope that we will have some transparency and accountability of those. Because the other thing, Shashi, if it is, donors will basically claim that as part of the climate financing. So whatever funds they give us, in terms of participation, it will be part of the climate financing allocation anyway.
Now, you've said a recent statistic in the transparency report said that something like, and this is an astounding figure, something like 60+% of corruption exists in government. Why do you why does such a figure exist? 60 odd percent. It's like 2 out of 3 people believe there is corruption in government.
Well, Shashi, there's a international transparency agency which comes out with a what you call corruption perception index, and what it shows is that 68% of the people, or 2 out of 3 people, believe that corruption is a big problem in government. Uh, so that's a perception, and that's a very important observation by Transparency International, and the perception by 68% of the people that there is corruption in government. We, as I have said earlier, and let me state that again, that as far as we are concerned, there's been a huge amount of wastage, pilferage, and mismanagement within the government system and within the allocation of the budget. And I gave you some figures earlier, saying on average about $500 million between 2015 to 2020. In 6 years, we're talking about $3 billion being wasted. And that is very, very important for us to understand. And we have said this very clearly. I mean, government doesn't seem to understand, conflict of interest. We've seen, large donors, business people. In fact, there is a cabal of business people in this country, in my view, who have kind of captured the government in a way that they sit on boards, they fund Fiji First Party, they get government contracts. So there's a lot going on that needs to be brought out in a very transparent and accountable manner. And that is, so it's not surprising that 68% of the people perceive there is a lot of corruption in government.
Thank you very much for that brief answer. Now, again, if I may please request to be brief, turn to a subject that a lot of people in government don't like to talk about, and that is the Fiji National Provident Fund. Figures released this week, they've revealed some startling facts, and I find this absolutely astounding. Again, that more than 58,700 members have zero balances in their account. And this is according to FNPF's 2021 annual report. It is said they've said though, the issue is not unique to the fund. What are your views about the FNPF situation?
Sashi, I just got this report yesterday, so I haven't actually looked at it in great detail. But just some quick general points with respect to FNPF. I mean, since the 2006 coup, FNPF board always used to have employers, government, and employees representative, and this government basically took that provision away. So for many years now, there's been no workers representative on the FNPF board. Basically, the board includes, I would say, some government cronies, and some of the decisions with respect to the way in which FNPF has dealt with the pensioners. They changed the people who are on pension before unilaterally had the pension rate reduced or given an option. So those are historical issues. But the question with respect to government borrowing, more than 3 billion borrowing by government is from the FNPF. There are questions about the current state of return from government FNPF investments in hotels and other entities. So these are questions that we've been asking, and we will continue to ask. But with respect to so many people who have zero balances, there would be a number of explanations for that. But overall, I mean, if I had more time, I could go into a bit more detail. But that's all I want to say with respect to an overview of what's happening within the FNPF at the moment.
Thank you, Biman. Now, before we wrap up, if I may just go to some of the viewers' questions. Naresh Kumar is a viewer from Newcastle. Naresh asks that do you think, is it true that the government is using COVID-19 as an scapegoat to the economic decline? Your brief response to that, please.
I wouldn't say that. I think, as I said to you, the economic situation was already deteriorating before COVID-19 pandemic, and when the COVID-19 hit us, we have been badly affected. And as I said, we are just struggling to make ends meet, so to speak, in relation to government as well as relation to families and people. But as I said, a lot of the support that has come from our donor partners and has come from our people, including people like yourself and the somebody who's just asked the question. I think it was, what did you say, Naresh?
Naresh
Sashi?
Kumar.
Naresh,
Yes.
yeah. I mean, a lot of remittances have been sustaining many of our families in this country.
We have a viewer from Auckland, New Zealand, asking if you came into power, what is the first thing you will change? And that question is from Neera Mupner.
Very important question. The first thing we will do, Shashi, is to change the style of governance. We will be consultative. We will organize immediately within probably 100 days an economic summit. We will ensure that we talk to the people and make the people feel that it is a government which is going to talk to them. We will
Great.
begin by doing that. Of course, there will be so many other things to do in a very short period of time.
Dr. Anil Kumar from Sydney asks, what is your party going to do to make elections more conducive to fair play?
Well, that's a very good question, but the laws have been made by this government. We have to work within those laws. But from from our political party point of view, we are encouraging people. We are telling our people not to be afraid, not to shy away from voting, not to shy away from re-registering or changing your voter cards, and making sure that people do participate in meetings. And we want people to be as engaged as possible so that within the laws, within the draconian laws that are there, the people have the freedom to vote. One thing I want to say, Sashi, governments, I mean, dictatorial governments in other countries have done this. You can change laws, you can control institutions, but you can't control the people, because it's the people who change government. It's the people who vote governments in. And so I have a lot of confidence in the people, in the ability of the people, in the wisdom of the people. And I think people understand that the opposition parties are in a difficult situation. because of some of these laws, and the onus is on them. I think a lot of them are telling us when we go out that this time we will come out, we will participate, and we will vote this government out.
And what another
And that's a
question?
very positive feeling and positive feedback that we're getting.
All right, thank you. And another question, what are your views on the Elections Office and the independence of the Elections Office?
Well, we have said a lot of things in the last 7 years. Uh, we are saying very, very clearly. Uh, of course, the chairman of the Electoral Commission has resigned, allegedly on the basis that there are trust fund issues with respect to his law firm, and that he didn't have a practicing certificate. And the question that the NFP, through our MP Ladora Geregere Tambua in Parliament, we asked whether the Attorney General, who is the Minister for Elections, actually knew about it. And if he knew about it, why was the chairman of the Electoral Commission reappointed? So these are important questions that we will continue to ask, and we will have a very, very close watch on the elections office and the process of election, so that the election is held in a very transparent and an accountable way from the point of view of people. And as I said, if the people come out and vote, that's the key. And I think a lot of people are beginning to understand that.
All right, now let me ask you this. Where to for Fiji in the short to medium term? What do you see in the horizon, Biman?
Well, I am a very optimistic person, Sashi. Despite all the gloom that exists at the moment, with respect to governance, with respect to democracy, with respect to media freedom, with respect to the economy, I am confident that our people have the wisdom, our people have the courage, our people will not be afraid to change things for the better. And I want to be part of that change, and I look forward to a better Fiji as soon as possible.
Well, I was going to give you a chance to an opportunity to address something that I may not have raised as a closing address. Was that your closing address, or would you like to actually give us a closing address, a brief one?
Well, that was my closing address, but I just want to say thank you very much, Shachi. This has been great, and as I said to you, the media environment, media laws in this country are very, very restrictive, and so we appreciate people like yourselves, and through your medium, we're able to talk to our people. And my message to all the people out there, thank you once again for sending to your people, to your families, all the remittances. That's helped a lot of people keep going, and many of them would have been in dire straits if those kind of remittances were not coming. And I also want to appeal to them, appeal to all of you out there to participate actively, by way of talking to your families and friends, and following what's happening in Fiji in terms of the political and economic discourse leading up to the next election. And we hope uh, to see change in Fiji, and a change for a better.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have one observation that I would like to share with you. And look, from 1985, when I first started work in radio, I have interviewed prime ministers, I have interviewed presidents, visiting dignitaries, and many, many, many people. And if you've been watching this program this afternoon, from the start to now, you too would have noticed that Professor Prasad, I believe, did not look at any notes, did not refer to any iPad or laptop or anything. He just gave it the way he saw it, without relying on reference material. Now, that is the hallmark of a man who knows his material and has the facts on his fingertips. A man who came fully prepared to participate in what I believe was a robust discussion on Fiji today and the politics of Fiji today. Professor Biman Prasad, the Member of Parliament, Fiji, leader of the National Federation Party, I would like to sincerely thank you for accepting my invitation to participate in Sashi Singh's Talking Point. I would like to extend an open invitation to you and to your party delegates to take part in my program next year, a year when Fiji goes to the elections. I hope you'll accept that invitation.
Thank you, Shashi. I will accept it with pleasure. But thank you for that rather generous, compliment. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you to all the viewers.
Thank you very much for your participation. You may now go and have your lunch as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that was Professor Biman Prasad, the Member of Parliament, Fiji, and the leader of the National Federation Party. A very frank discussion from the good professor. And I would like to extend my thank you to him one more time. Thank you, Professor Biman Prasad. Now, ladies and gentlemen, of course, let me tell you that I'm pleased to advise that not next week, the week after, our chief guest on Sashi Singh's Talking Point on the 19th of December 2021 will be the leader of the Unity Fiji Party, Mr. Savinatha Narumbe. I hope you'll be able to join me for that discussion with the leader of the Fiji Unity Party. And I have also extended the same courtesy to the Fiji Labour Party, to the People's Alliance Party, to the Fiji First Party, and I hope that they will accept the invitation to come and have their say. So, there's a balanced viewpoint. While our regular Fiji contributor, Dennis Rowan, is en route to the UK, and in just a moment, we will have some news from Fiji. Well, I will just give you a bit of glimpse of the news from Fiji. The Fiji Labour Party's delegates conference that was held in Lautoka yesterday passed a resolution calling for the removal of the Supervisor of Elections, Mohammed Saneem, from the position. The delegates also resolved that the party take legal action on this matter if the Constitutional Officers Commission fails to investigate Mr. Saneem. The FLP resolution actually read, "The conference therefore directs the party to take appropriate legal action to resolve the matter in the interest of justice, fair play, and the conduct of fair and free general elections in 2022-23. As Dennis Rounds would say, watch this space." Sodelpa MP Nico Nawaikula has called for the scrapping of the Itoke Land Trust Board, the TLTB. As he says, the board has moved far away from its core role of acting in the interest and benefit of the landowners. Nawaikula added that the TLTB is now acting in the interest and the benefit of the government and the tenants. He said that many trust corporations are needed to look after the interests of the indigenous Fijians. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Voringimbani Marama says the word of the most reckless member of the week belongs to Nawaikula, whose call he described as more than insane and most serious threat to the Itoke. Still on Prime Minister Voringimbani Marama, well, he has said this week that the government has never appointed anyone on the basis of their last name, their family pedigree, or based on where they come from. Speaking in Parliament while giving his right of reply to the President's speech, the Prime Minister said that the new President, Ratu Williame Katunivere, is not a Fijian who has coasted through life on the basis of his birthright. Prime Minister Bainimarama also took a swipe at opposition parliamentarians, saying the opposition never believed in merit-based leadership. The Reserve Bank of Fiji says the influx of personal remittances, along with the second payout of the government's $360 cash assistance and an improvement in labour market conditions, is expected to provide some additional impetus to the consumption spending during the Christmas festive season. According to the November Economic Review, the inward personal remittances rose by 17.8% to a total of $690.6 million in the year to October of this year. Figures released this week has revealed some startling facts about the Fiji National Provident Fund, with 58,700 members that have zero balances. According to FNPF's 2021 annual report, the issue was not unique to the fund. FNPF said it was exploring a number of policy changes and operation adjustments to address membership data and reporting. And after a lapse of some 20 months due to the COVID-19 pandemic, finally, there is some smile on the faces of Fijian hotel operators and hotel workers alike. With overseas visitors flying to Fiji this week, experts believe that the influx of tourists will create an immediate impact on Fiji's economy, and the ripple effect will be felt in the employment sector. The tourism industry is hopeful that the coming festive season will bring some joy to the industry and the people who work on it. Some brief headlines from things in Fiji. Hopefully, we will have a more detailed look at the happenings in Fiji next week, and hopefully Dennis will be able to join us as well. You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point from Sydney, Australia. Now it's time to say a very good afternoon to our Sydney contributor, former Fiji TV journalist Nikhil Singh. Nikhil, looking good there. Good afternoon to you.
Thank you, Sashi. Good afternoon to you as well.
Wonderful to have you. Now, yesterday we had the local government elections in New South Wales. I know for a fact you were quite busy. Do you have any updates on the results?
Thanks, Sashi. Yeah, so these elections were twice deferred, if you recall, due to the COVID restrictions, and finally yesterday we got to see it getting off the ground. In terms of the context and how big this election is in New South Wales, there were some 5,000 candidates standing for election for more than 12,000 councillor positions at 124 councils, local councils across the state. I will quickly talk about the City of Sydney Council, as all eyes were on the incumbent Mayor Clover Moore after some strong campaigning to unseat her by opponents. Clover Moore has proved to be a very popular Mayor of Sydney, and the results so far indicate that despite a swing against her, she will be returned as the Lord Mayor of Sydney for a historic 5th term. And she has been a mayor for Sydney for the last 17 years, I think first being elected in 2004. Counting is still in progress as you factor in the pre-poll and the postal votes. The final tallies could take a few more days.
All right, so Clover Moore proving her detractors wrong in a number of ways. Now, the Australian Federal Parliament has adjourned until next year. The parliamentary sittings finished for this year. However, the final week of sittings sprung a few surprises. Give us your highlights of the week.
As one political commentator, prominent political commentator rather, Nikki Sava described on ABC's Insider's program this morning, damaged but not destroyed is how she described Scott Morrison. Two senior cabinet ministers have called it quits. One has stood aside and returned to the backbench. I'll start off with Christian Porter. He is the former Attorney General who made no secret about having strong ambitions to one day lead the country. Well, that ambition will not see the light of day. As Porter announced, he will be leaving politics and not recontesting next year. Porter, of course, it probably went all downhill for Christian Porter when he faced historical rape allegations, which he has strongly denied. No charges have been laid against him, but the controversy did not end there. Porter had declared that he had received some funds from a blind trust to help pay his legal fees in a defamation case against the ABC. So that donor remains anonymous. We will not find out who the donor is anytime soon. Is it fair for ministers or government members, for that matter, to receive such donations or assistance from anonymous donors? Is that a right thing in the interest of transparency and accountability? Well, that's the million-dollar question. So Porter's gone, and then only weeks after telling a journalist that he had been pre-selected and was ready to battle it out to return to Parliament next year, Health Minister Greg Hunt, he announced his retirement from politics. Greg Hunt has been the face of the federal government in relation to COVID restrictions and COVID measures, and how the federal government is assisting in the process. In fact, he appeared this morning facing the nation and sharing the news that the Therapeutic Goods Administration, the TGA, has approved COVID or the Pfizer vaccination for kids between the age of 5 to 11. So a very prominent sort of figure in recent months or couple of years. He has announced that he will no longer be coming back to Parliament. So if Morrison thought that he would have had some breathing space after the two high-profile departures in as many days, a former staffer dropped a bombshell alleging that she had been physically abused during a consensual affair with the Education Minister, Alan Tudge. Tudge has strongly denied the allegations, but he has been removed from cabinet as an internal investigation takes shape. So, Sashi, 3 ministers in a week, a government member of parliament crossing the floor to vote with the opposition, and in fact, a government MP speaking on the wrong bill in parliament. Certainly not the way Morrison would have liked to finish off the year. Let's see what 2022 brings.
And what does the 2022 sitting calendar look like?
Well, the government's proposed parliamentary sitting calendar for next year includes just 10 sitting days before August, if an election is called immediately after the budget announcement. And that's where we're looking at the May election possibility. I know my prediction is March, but that's another sort of topic. If March is when we go to the ballot box, then that proposed 10 sitting days will be even further reduced. So if you look at it, Sashi, 10 days in office over a 8-month period, that's not a bad gig. But certainly it has angered the opposition, which claims that the Morrison government is avoiding scrutiny and has no intention of being accountable to the voters of Australia.
Now, supermarket giant Coles have made the headlines this week. What have they been up to, Nikhil?
Well, I think
Are they in trouble? Are they in trouble?
Well, I think the Coles slogan is down, down, prices are down. But I think in this case, it is down, down, wages are down. The Fair Work Ombudsman has accused Coles of underpaying just under 8,000 employees.
Wow.
A total of, get this right, a total of $115 million. So the Ombudsman alleges most of the underpayments were the result of Coles paying its salaried employees annual salaries that were insufficient to cover the minimum lawful entitlements, given the employees generally performed significant amounts of overtime work. The union movement has long been campaigning for legislation to be introduced to stop what they call effectively wage theft. So Coles is in a bit of hot water, $115 million of underpayment, and the Fair Work Ombudsman is pursuing that matter.
All right, and briefly, last week you reported on the impending strike action by the New South Wales public school teachers. I believe there's been some further developments.
Yes, actually, as I shared last week, some 60,000 public school teachers voted to go on strike on the 7th of December, which is in a couple of days' time. But what has happened is the New South Wales Department of Education on Thursday succeeded in getting orders from the Industrial Relations Tribunal blocking the 24-hour strike planned for Tuesday, and also preventing or restricting any industrial action for the next 6 months. Interestingly, the teachers' union, the New South Wales Teachers Federation, has almost immediately come back and said that they will be defying the orders by the tribunal, and the strike will go ahead as planned. The New South Wales Teachers Federation says that the problems within the profession are too large for it to comply with what they call unprecedented orders to call off a planned one-day strike and refrain from any further action for the next 6 months. So as far as the union's concerned, the strike is still on. Back to you, Sashi.
Nikhil, thank you very much for your contribution again on this Sunday afternoon. Sincerely appreciated, and we'll catch up with you next week. Have a great day, Nikhil.
You do, Sashi. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, this is our program for today. I hope you enjoyed the program. Please visit Sashi Singh's Talking Points page on Facebook and be a member or do a like. And I'd like to thank Professor Biman Prasad again for joining me this afternoon. A big thank you to Dennis Rance for all his input in the SSTP program, even up to the last few hours before his flight. And as I said to Nikhil Singh, thank you for his report on things happening around Australia this week. A special mention and thank you to our newly appointed Honorary Media Liaison Manager Nareesh Kumar, who's been working behind the scenes to arrange for me the talent to participate in this program. And a big thank you to Dev Chopra from Chops Photography and Arts for designing the posters for the SSTP shows. Dev, just love your timing and love your thinking and artwork. Well, that's all that we have for you today. A long show, but an important one, with Professor Biman Prasad sharing a lot of views on Fiji and where Fiji is today politically. From Sydney, Australia, this is Sashimendra Singh saying, till we meet again, hopefully next Sunday, thank you, goodbye, namaste, and ni samore.